So let me just introduce Daniel to you. Daniel is a botanist who works for the Westland Resources Incorporated, which is an environmental consulting firm based in Tucson. Before moving to Arizona 3 years ago, Daniel worked at the University of California, Davis as a herbarium curator. Daniel received his master's degree in biology from the University of Southern Mississippi in 2015, where his thesis project involved preparing a species checklist for the 1,200 plus vascular plant species occurring in Wayne County, Mississippi. That amazed me. I didn't imagine there'd be that high level of diversity in one county. Daniel's more recent obsession with growing and illustrating plants in the Mallow family, the Malvaceae, began when he started writing an identification guide for Butylon parishii, a species of conservation concern that is endemic to Arizona and Sonora. So that's what Daniel's going to be talking about, is the mallows. And he's going to talk about the diversity of native mallows. The family Malvaceae in southern Arizona is incredible. We will review that diversity and talk about what species do well in cultivation here. Daniel will share successes and failures in cultivation over 20 different native mallow species in Tucson, including globe mallows, velvet leaf mallows, hibiscus, wild cotton, and others. So that's what we're in for tonight. I just have to mention one little tiny thing. I love the mallow family, as most people do. And I got to tell you why. Because when I was first learning about plants, the mallow family is probably the easiest family to recognize, next to maybe the Asteraceae or something. You can't miss it because it has such a distinct floral structure. And that's another little fun thing that I learned when I was studying botany. And it's one of those things that once you learn it, you'll never forget it, and you want to use it whenever you can. And what I'm referring to is the fact that the mallow family is characterized by a monadelphous andrecium. Is that a cool term or what? And what that means is andrecium is a collective term for all the stamens, and monadelphous means one form, so they're fused into a tube around the style. You can't miss it. It's just a dead giveaway. And as I said, once you know that term, it's just so much fun to share it with your friends and stuff, because it really impresses them. But anyway, enough of that. Daniel's going to be the expert on this and tell us about Malvaceous Miscellany, which is a great title, I must say. Okay, thanks, Daniel.
Thank you, Doug. Thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be here with y'all. I'm excited to hear some of your Malvaceous Miscellany. What Doug's talking about in the mallow family is this little thing right here. So the mallow family is really interesting to me, and I've kind of focused my research efforts on it and want to share with you. And by research, I actually don't do any kind of fancy hypothesis-based science. Most of what I do is observation, taking pictures. And these days I'm into illustration, so I'm going to share some photography and some drawings. Actually, this is one that I just did the other day of a globe mallow, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my interest in that, and just like Doug said about successes and failures with growing mallows, I feel like I also have successes and failures with illustrating mallows. So I'm going to try to stick to this outline. And you'll see that there's a lot of miscellany that's going to come your way over the next few minutes. But in general, we're going to kind of go by this outline. So we're going to talk about what is a mallow, what's the mallow family. We're going to talk about identifying mallows in Arizona. We're going to talk about growing mallows in Arizona, and then we're going to talk about some kind of random insect visitors that have showed up on my mallows that I've noticed. And I'm not an entomologist, so maybe some of you are, and maybe you can tell me what some of these bugs are that I'm seeing. Up in the right part of the screen here is another illustration that I'm working on. These are types of hairs in the genus Sphaerosia. Some of you know Rice Lindley. I know Doug knows Rice Lindley. So Rice Lindley is he's a wonderful guy. He's retired and he's working on a bunch of things. But one of the things he's working on is this genus within the mallow family, the globe mallows. So that's another thing we'll talk about. You guys probably know globe mallows. You see them in the spring. They kind of light up the sides of the road, turn them orange. Really, really fun family. Also called sore-eye mallows because of these hairs that will get in your eyes. Some people call them pink-eye mallows. So, all right. Here's another draft illustration. This one's more abstract. These are Maricarps. So we're getting down into the fine details here. These are Maricarps in the genus Sphaerosia. We'll talk a little bit more about those as well. So what's a mallow? The Malvaceae. It's an enormous family. According to the Flora of North America, there are approximately 240 genera. Genera is a fancy word for genuses, I think because genuses is hard to say, but that is the plural. And there's over 4,000 species. Actually, that number is interesting right there because that's about how many species total we have of vascular plants that we have in the state of Arizona. We have about 4,200 species of vascular plants in Arizona. So the mallow family includes some of these things, things like chocolate, cotton, durian, hibiscus. There's all kinds of hibiscus too, right? There's the cultivated kinds. There's the kind that that have the succulent little calyx that you can make the drink out of. There's cotton, which is a very important mallow. I already mentioned cotton, jute, okra. So very important family, very big family. Here's some characteristics of the Malvaceae. Doug's already mentioned one of these. These are kind of big, annoying words, and so I don't want to spend too much time on these because I kind of want to show these more than talk about them. But there's a lot of morphological or physical characteristics that make up this family, and these are just some of the things that I've noticed. But you can go into the literature, and of course you can see and read more about these. But one of the things I'm going to do throughout this presentation is just kind of highlight some of the different artists and the different researchers that have studied this family and the different ways that they've studied this family. I've kind of hinted at that a little bit in the bottom right of your screen. You see part of a phylogeny there. I'll get into that just a little bit. A phylogeny is like an evolutionary family tree. Don't get too bogged down in what antheriferous filaments are. That's basically a synonym for what Doug was just talking about. So botanists have obviously had trouble over the years coming up with ways of describing plants that make any sense in English. We like to have our fancy words. Another fancy word associated with the Malvaceae is schizocarp, which we'll have some pictures of schizocarps. My first botany professor talked about it like a cheese wheel, which if you've ever seen a cheese wheel, kind of is in nice sections. Things in the mallow family, the Malvaceae have very distinct fruits as well. Here's an old botanical illustration. If you're just really curious and you want to go back to this PowerPoint, this is actually a hyperlink here. You can go to the source. But this is a hollyhock here. So one of the members of the mallow family. You can see one of the things that's so amazing when you look back in time is that there were many more botanical illustrators probably then than there are today. And just the way that the detail and the color that they put into some of these old illustrations is just fantastic. This is a little bit of a break in terms of what we've been talking about, but this is also hollyhock. It's just a personification of hollyhock by one of my favorite artists, Walter Crane. I just had to throw that in there. If you've ever seen his literature, Walter Crane loved to personify plants. And so this text here says, "The hollyhock, his standard high, rears proudly to the autumn sky." Hollyhocks, by the way, are native to Europe, not here. But we actually do have a native wild hollyhock here in North America. And then we actually have one, we have a few of this thing in Arizona as well, which I'll show a list in a minute of some of the species in Arizona, and I can point that one out. This is another old illustration of Gossypium, the genus for cotton. If you know our native, we have a native wild cotton that you see a lot in Arizona, especially if you go up to any elevation at all, and you might recognize this genus here as the cotton genus. All right, I just had to put this in here because I'm from Mississippi, and there's a school in Mississippi, Delta State University, and their mascot is the Fighting Okra. My sister went to DSU, and my brother-in-law as well, and some friends have gone there. Great little small school, but these are real. These are not deep fakes or anything. Fighting Okra. So there is a school with a Malvaceous mascot. I'm seeing some smiles from people. I'm glad you enjoyed that. We can definitely talk more about. I remember actually, I was fairly young. I remember going to DSU for the first time and going to a football game and seeing the okra. Some guy dressed up as okra. It's pretty awesome. I have okra growing in my backyard. I love okra. It does really well here in Arizona. Needs a little water, a little shade, but okra is one of those interesting plants where we don't exactly know where it came from as far as its domestication history, but it definitely started showing up in cuisine in North and Central and South America several hundred years ago, and it's become it's an important part of cuisines around the world. And since I'm from the American South, obviously fried okra is a huge thing there. I meet some people sometimes in Arizona, and they're like, "What is okra?" And I'm like, "What is this place where people don't know what okra is?" But it's a little dry here to grow okra, but it can be done. Here's some more of those stamens that Doug was talking about. Basically, one of the things that makes the Mallow family in terms of its morphology, in terms of its physical forms, is the fact that you have this down here. You have basically this female part coming up, and most plants, I don't know if you can see my hands, most plants, the male part arises separately from the female part. But in the Malvaceae, they kind of arise together and then split off. So like in this little guy over here, E, which is a Gossypium, the female parts, if you can see my mouse, the female parts are up here, the male parts are here. So that's one of the things that kind of is distinct about this family. There's a lot of other things, not just in the flowering parts, like I said. And another common characteristic of the Mallow family are these sometimes I call them weaponized hairs, because sometimes they're really soft and cuddly and friendly, but man, they can be mean. If you've ever, we were just talking about okra. If you've ever tried to grow and pick okra, you probably know that you need gloves. Even if you've cultivated the variety called Clemson Spineless, it's still got some pretty nasty spines on it. And a lot of mallows do. And there's other plant families that have, I know I said I wouldn't talk about other plant families, but oaks have a lot of stellate hairs. If you've ever looked at an oak leaf under a microscope, you've probably seen hairs that look like this. All right, we'll move on. Here's a photo that I took actually of a Boutilon parishii. This is when I landed in Arizona and got my first surveying job. It was for this rare thing on Forest Service land, and so I really fell in love with this plant. It's got these in real life, these are about 1 millimeter long, which is pretty long. They're visible. This is under a microscope, and you can kind of see where they're arising from. This is the tooth of one of the leaves here. But this is again a really common feature in the Malvaceae. These are stellate hairs. By the way, stellar comes from the word stella, which means star, right? So it's like a star-shaped hair. So these are under a microscope as well in dark field. These are hairs from a globe mallow. And again, these are also called pink eye mallows and sore eye mallows because if you get the hairs in your eyes, they are very irritating. I love having them in my yard, however. We'll talk about that a little bit. But when I handle them, I do wear gloves because they can be very irritating. But people in Arizona have like cactus in their yard, so right, if you've got cactus in your yard, this should be no problem. I still don't understand my neighbors here in Tucson that let cholla grow in their yard, because I do a lot of hiking for work, and I'm just like, when I get home, I don't want to see any more cholla. So all right. Okay, I won't spend too much time on this slide here, but this is from a fantastic paper. If you're interested in evolutionary history and genetics and plants, this is a great paper to check out. It's basically like they deal with the evolutionary history of mallows. I'll go to the next slide, kind of zoom in a little bit. Here you can see, and I'm gonna talk about Gossypium a whole lot because I really like this genus. It's a very interesting, it's the genus for cotton. So there's a lot of interesting wild Gossypium and cultivated Gossypium, but this just illustrates here the attempt to classify these different genera and these different species into family relationships according to their arranged basically by their genetics here. And these little tiny numbers are kind of like confidence factors, and we won't get into that because frankly I'm not really expert enough to explain it to you. But this is a great paper if you're interested in that kind of thing. And another great figure from the same paper. Now you're going to start to see some familiar faces, hopefully, because some of these things do occur in Arizona because Arizona is so rich in the Malvaceae. You'll probably see a few familiar faces here. For example, this guy right here is a really neat little genus, Harasantia. This thing grows and washes in Arizona, and it's got these cool little, they look like paper lanterns, the fruits do. This genus we have here, Sida, we have several of these things. But anyway, this is more of a Malvaceae in the big sense that they're dealing with fruit types and stuff. So really cool paper if you're into that kind of thing. This is a map that I generated from the very cool resource GBIF, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. It's totally free to use. You can go on GBIF and look up 2 hours later, and you've spent, it can really suck a lot of time. But it's a great resource if you're interested in plants, animals, whatever. But basically, when I went to this website, searched for Malvaceae, and then quickly within their interface was able to make a map of all occurrences of the family Malvaceae. A couple of really cool things here that you might notice. The first thing is mallows kind of like to be hot, or at least they don't like to be cold. And you can kind of see that on this map. There are no wild or cultivated records of Malvaceae in these very cold places. There's like, I would call it almost like a mallow line, right? Running from here to over here. So it kind of tells us, looking at the family in this big sense kind of tells us a little bit about what they like to do and where they like to grow. Here is some of that same data next to the USDA's estimate of cotton production by county. Again, cotton is a mallow. So you can see, again, just kind of reinforcing the point that things in this family like to be hot. There's actually quite a bit of cotton grown in Arizona, if you didn't know that. You guys probably all knew that. My dad grew up in Mississippi, and he tells a really interesting story, which is that, now in Mississippi, you only see cotton in cultivated, big cultivated fields. But he said when he was growing up, you used to see cotton just sort of everywhere, on a hillside, in the shade, just wherever you could grow it. So kind of fascinating. Obviously, cotton has a troubled past, and that could be a whole topic of conversation. there's a really good book that talks about kind of the tragic history of cotton. It's called The Empire of Cotton. Really, really great book on that topic. These photos to the right here, I grew these from seed from this wonderful place in Tucson called Native Seed Search, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But I just have this statement here that cotton is culturally and economically important long before Europeans got here. The Native Americans they totally shaped the direction of cotton cultivation. And if you've read anything about cotton cultivation, you've probably seen that there's, cotton cultivation has happened all around the world, but some of the most important strains actually happened in this part of the world and south, New Mexico. This thing over on the right that I'll talk about, it's just a really interesting plant. The cotton comes right off the seeds. So it's definitely bred for like hand picking cotton, whereas cotton today, commercial cotton, upland cotton, is bred to be ginned from a machine. So it doesn't come right off the seeds. So really, if you're looking for a cool educational mallow to grow in your yard, you can get these seeds from Desert Survivors. Moving on to identifying mallows in Arizona. I'm just going to kind of roll call some resources, and a lot of these are applicable to all plant families. First one, hopefully everybody has seen this. This is a really fantastic resource, and we could do a whole talk on this, but the Southwest Environmental Information Network, or SciNet, completely free to use. It's a really wonderful site. You can look at live pictures of plants. You can look at herbarium specimens of plants, which is very important. Sometimes boring because they're flattened on a page, but it's a very important means of understanding plants and their histories. So moving from this site to this page here, which you probably can't read, I apologize, the text is small. The only point of this page is to say that there's about 90 species of mallows in Arizona, give or take. There's that list. By the way, the mallow that I was talking about, the wild, let's see if it's on here. Yeah, it's on here. The wild hollyhock that we have in Arizona, and it's just in a few little mountain ranges, but it's this thing down here. It's like Yamna grandiflora. I probably messed up the genus name, but very, very weird distribution in North America. But it sort of looks like hollyhock. It's a different genus than hollyhock, but it's yeah, it's an interesting plant. Another great resource, if you haven't seen this, it's open access, completely free, is a paper by Felger and several other people and it's in the journal Phytoneuron. So all you have to do is if you just can't wait for this presentation to be over, you can Google Felger Malvaceous, and it should pop right up in your first search. But it's a really fantastic resource. They did, it's just for Southwest Arizona, but they finished, and they did all the plant families. So if you're kind of getting into plants and you're like, you don't know where to start, you can start digging into these PDFs. Man, it's a really wonderful resource. Really lovely photography, etc. This one's a little bit more obscure. This is the Malvaceous of Mexico by a man who has passed on now, but he was kind of the great Malvaceous expert of the last century, Paul Fixell. I may have messed up his name, but if you get into mallows, you'll see his name. But this is a really cool book because we're so close to Mexico. This one you might have trouble accessing. You might have to have a library account. But if you really want this resource, I can just email it to you as a PDF. But it's a really cool resource. And of course, hopefully most people in this meeting have heard of the flora of North America. It's nicer as a book, so it was intended to be a book, and it's printed as a book. And if you go to your local university or herbarium, usually they have a copy. But it's also been completely digitized, and this I just pulled right off the web. you'll notice in the center there's a lovely illustration of our native, in Arizona, our native gossypium, our wild cotton. Sometimes it's called Arizona wild cotton. But I'm not sure who this artist is here that did all these, but his signature, his or her signature or their signature is down here. But I love these illustrations. I see these as inspirational material here. All right, there I am pointing to a sad little shriveled up Abutilon parishii. So that when I got to Arizona 3 years ago, I started doing these surveys in the National Forest, in the Tonto National Forest. So this is close to Superior, Arizona. And this little guy down here is our target species, meaning we're trying to document and understand the population health of this thing. Interestingly, there were a series of surveys in the 90s by David Bertelsen and several others, and they could only come up with less than about 600 individuals total, known individuals in Arizona and Sonora. And we did a similar survey, a 2-year survey, and found a similar result. But it's not on the endangered species list. It maybe should be, but it's a sensitive species legally. But it's very limited in range, and it's very distinct. It is unlike anything else in the genus. And that's what got me interested in mallows, because I was like, okay, I got to identify this thing. And I'm like, oh man, there's 10 Abutilon species or something like that. I should know because we wrote a paper on it. But I was like, there's a lot of Abutilon species. And I was coming from California, and the only Abutilon that I knew was this thing growing right out to the building, this cultivated Abutilon, which people also call flowering maple. You may have seen that in the horticultural trade. You might have seen it. I see it in nurseries around Tucson. But anyway, we have several native Abutilon, and that's what got me into studying them. And here it is. And up in the left-hand corner here, that's its entire distribution, is in Arizona and Sonora. You can get this plant from Desert Survivors in Tucson if you want your own copy. I can also give you some seed, although the seed are very stubborn. They like to be very old before they germinate, which is an interesting characteristic of Malvaceae. But this is one of the first things that I worked on, is this paper. And basically, we were growing these. I grew this out and photographed it for this paper, because I was still not convinced that these were. I just needed to see these things. We were surveying for these things. There's a lot of money being poured into these surveys, and so I just had this. I was like, I gotta know what they look like when they're growing next to each other. So I grew this and several other similar species. This is a free paper. You can download this paper online. It's the same journal as I was talking about earlier, Phytoneuron. And one of the cool results of this paper is down here, this guy, Abutilon wrightii. Before we started doing this, the last record of this thing was from like the 20s. It was the last time it had been observed in Arizona. And I was in the herbarium at ASU, and I was flipping through herbarium specimens, and I was like, hey, I was like, you found a new species for Arizona? And Liz Makings was like, what? So they had collected it, and that's how these things work. They're slow, but they had collected it and pressed it, but they hadn't quite figured out what it was yet. It was just very weird. And you can see it's kind of a decumbent plant. Actually, I have one growing in a pot, and most Abutilon in Arizona goes straight up. This thing just falls right over. It has no, upward strength. So anyway, now Desert Survivors is selling that thing and propagating that thing because we found a population actually fairly near to y'all. The only known population is in the San Pedro riparian area, fairly close to Sierra Vista. I think some of you guys are in Sierra Vista. Really, really cool species. I'll keep going. I could talk about these Abutilon all day, but I've got to keep going. This is just kind of this map here is from 1976. It's a hand-drawn map, and even though he didn't have SciNet and he didn't have all these databases and stuff, he was pretty spot on with his. You just, you can tell these old maps. It's like somebody's just drawing on, like, all right, this is where I think it is, and it's actually still a pretty accurate map. His taxonomy, Fryxell's taxonomy, and his work was so careful that it's still really valuable today. This was more that we did in the paper. These species deserve more justice than this, than getting stuck in a single figure, but these are things that people get confused with the Boutilon, so we put that in the paper. I know I was really into dark backgrounds. I kind of hate dark backgrounds now, but I was in love with it at the time. So you'll see a lot of my stuff goes back and forth, but yeah, that's called it's often called dark field photography, where you kind of black out the background. Usually I would drape a black sheet behind the subject and then put some kind of artificial light on the subject that's not lighting up the black sheet behind it, so that you get that effect. But it's people have pointed it out that it's very hard to print, wastes a whole lot of toner. So I apologize to everyone's printers that have tried to print that out. So moving on to white backgrounds, these are all mallows that I've grown in my yard. They were all alive at the time, and I stuck them all on the scanner and took a family picture. So that's what this is. And here they are with names. So this is again, we've got about 90 species of native mallow in Arizona. This doesn't even begin to cover it, but it starts to cover it. Starts to cover some of this diversity. There's only one thing in here that's not native, and he's peeking out right here, and that's okra. But I just couldn't leave okra out, even though it's not native. I just had to put an okra leaf in there. So there's a little tiny okra leaf, but everything else in the photo is native. This gossypium here, though, is cultivated, but it's the one. It's the cultivation name is Saccatone aboriginal. So I'll talk more about it, and I've already mentioned it a little bit, but it's you could think of it as a native cultivated plant, because it really was probably originated in this part of the world. All right, I want to talk a little bit about globe mallows, and I've mentioned that Rice Lindley is working on globe mallows. I walked into the herbarium one day, and in Tucson here at the University of Arizona, and was shook hands with the curator, George, and George said, "Oh, do you know Rice? He's also working on mallows." This is like my first time to the herbarium, and so Rice and I have been mallow collaborators ever since. This is a photo of Sphaerosia fendleri, and I got this from Desert Survivors in Tucson. Somebody collected this collected seed in Arizona and gave it to Desert Survivors, and that's often how they start stuff, is if somebody finds interesting seed and gives it to them. This is kind of a draft figure for the paper that we're working on, the guide that we're working on. Again, I'm kind of over the black background, but I was very obsessed with it for a period of my life. So there it is. One great thing about a black background is, of course, you can see when there's any translucent plant part, like down here is a cross section of a Sphaerosia stem, of a globe mallow stem. It really kind of brings out those hairs, whereas if I had taken this with a white background, it wouldn't do that as well. So there are advantages and disadvantages. Here are some globe mallow, some of our different globe mallow in Arizona, some of our different leaf types for this genus. Very interesting genus. Hopefully we'll have more out on this soon. There's a lot of diversity in this genus in Arizona. There's something close to like 20 species here in Arizona. It's really amazing. Up at the top here is Sphaerosia ambigua, or also parviflora or herbifolia. I can't remember the epithet for that. This one is something like Sphaerosia emerii. This is something like Sphaerosia angustifolia. This is Sphaerosia rusbii. This is Sphaerosia laxa, which is one you see up at kind of higher elevation. And this is Sphaerosia grossularifolia, which is interesting. I've never actually seen this one in person. I got this from cultivation, this leaf here to scan. And these were just scanned on an Epson scanner, and I've kind of cleaned up the background a little bit, just stuck them together. And I'd be happy to talk more about that. I already talked about these, but this is a draft pen and ink attempt to illustrate two different types of hairs in the globe mallow group. The stellate hair, A here, and the peltate hair, B. You don't see this one a lot, but it does exist. This is another draft figure of mine that I'm trying to illustrate the schizocarp and the merycarps. Like Bono, I'm not sure that I've found what I'm looking for yet, but it's been fun to try old school botanical illustration. This is I guess an illustration of an illustration, but here up at the top here I've started with pencils, and I'm trying to draw a cross section. I'm not really sure how well it turned out, but a cross section of a fruit, right? Actually, if you go several slides, this is what I'm trying to illustrate here. And you might just say, why not just include the picture? And that would be a valid point. Anyway, so then down here are the merycarps. Just a representative sample. So this has been a fun COVID activity, is doing a lot of botanical illustration. All right, moving to growing mallows in Arizona. Some of my favorite genera to grow: the globe mallows, Sphaerosia, abutilon, sometimes called velvet leaf mallows, sometimes called flowering maples. Not related to maples, but they have a similar leaf sometimes. Gossypium or cotton, hibiscus. So some of those things do really well here. Most of them are pretty easy to grow. I would say if you're trying to grow some hibiscus or some cotton or something interesting, I would say start out maybe in a place where you have some afternoon shade, because it'll require less water. And a lot of our mallows do well in full sun, but they're certainly more easily stressed. And if you're trying to transplant or something like that, they're more easily stressed. This is a globe mallow that is growing in my yard. This is Sphaerosia emerii, or you can just call it globe mallow, but it's all over Tucson. It's the kind of the dominant globe mallow in Tucson. It does really well. Again, has the stellate hairs that can be irritating. I love this photo. So Rice Lindley took this photo. This is just outside of Tucson. This is Sphaerosia coulteri, which is apparently an annual globe mallow. So most of them are perennial. But he took this in 2019 in March. And man, what a scene! And if you've driven around Arizona in the spring, you've probably seen a similar thing happen. But it's just a really iconic display to me. Talk a little bit about pink eye mallows. You might want to wear gloves if you're going to handle these things. There's this plant, Hibiscus biceptus. Some of you may know this plant. You've probably seen it in the wild. Desert Survivors sells it. I would not recommend it. It's the one mallow that just has these awful, awful sharp hairs, and they will. I've got a photo somewhere of one of the hairs sticking out of my finger. It's kind of gross. I didn't include it, but they are on par with cactus for me, not personally wanting them in my yard. But I keep my one alive in my little shade house. I just don't go near it very, very much. But salvage and transplant, this is kind of a thing that comes up with me in my work. I work for an environmental consulting firm, and so sometimes some of our clients are interested in building a housing development or getting copper out of the ground, and that usually requires them trying to get permits to destroy or modify. That sounded negative, or modify the environment. And so sometimes I deal with this issue of salvage. What do you do with these areas where you're gonna, somebody's gonna build a road or a pipeline or whatever. And it's the Tucson. There's succulent cactus and succulent societies that are all over this kind of thing, and they'll go and they'll salvage. But mallows usually aren't on salvage lists, but they're very salvageable. Sometimes, I'm just kind of summarizing here, sometimes the soil will break up if you're going to try to salvage them. If that happens, you can put them in, you can put some rooting powder in them and put them in like a sphagnum perlite mix, put them in a little shade, keep them moist for a few weeks, and usually, they may lose their leaves, but usually they will, they'll root, especially the perennial ones. You can also just clone mallows by cutting them and putting them in water. A lot of them will root that way. In fact, globe mallows will root very nicely just in water if you change the water every day. So here are some of my globe mallow babies. Now I have a confession to make. Not all of these are native to Arizona. This conspicuous hibiscus here that I got from Home Depot with the big pink flower, that is not a native mallow, but most of the rest of these guys are. Most of them are some form of a boutilon or spiralcia or something along those lines. This is another part of my mallow operation here. I built a crude shade house here, and that's really important if you're messing with cloning, cutting stems and that kind of thing. Could be improved, but you definitely need, if you're gonna try to propagate, your own plants and stuff, a little bit of shade is nice. And this, even though it looks a little ugly, this burlap is actually so burlap and jute. I'm like 99% sure what I'm about to tell you is true. Is this plant right here that this fabric was made out of is in fact a mallow. So good little tie in there. All right. Don't need to spend a whole lot of time on this, but basically there's a lot of things that will eat mallows and love to eat mallows. Aphids are one of those things. And we can talk more about this at the end if you guys are interested in pests and that kind of thing. This is a topic that I'm just starting to get into a little bit. Rabbits are cute, but they do like to eat your plants. So I have rabbit exclosures. You can buy a nice roll of anti-rabbit fencing at Home Depot for about $20. These guys up here at the top, their little larvae eat your leaves and poop. That's those little black things are your poop. So if you have some globe mallows and they look kind of sad, that's what's going on. And actually, globe mallows are pretty well adapted. So they start the moment they start getting munched on, they just like, all right, I'm out, and that leaf will start dying. So it's a kind of a cool response to watch, that kind of anti-herbivory response in mallows. Seed. So you can definitely grow these things from seed. I will say that sometimes you gotta give these seeds a couple of years, because especially the native ones, because they're adapted to this climate where they may not get a really good rainfall for them, until 4 years down the road. So a lot of them won't germinate immediately. This is a Desert Survivors. If you've ever been to Tucson, you should check out their operation. They just have a bunch of really cool native plants. Just a kind of a shout out to them. These are all in the bottom here. These are all plants that I got from Desert Survivors nursery. And Native Seed Search. Again, if you're in the Tucson area, you should check it out. It's a really cool collaboration between different organizations, and you can read all about their mission, what they're about on their website. They have a seed catalog. Pretty cool operation, Native Seed Search. This is that cotton I was talking about. So this is called Saskatoon Aboriginal, and they will sell this seed to you. This is it's actually very hard to. You can't just go online and buy cotton seed. There's regulations on cotton, but this is like an heirloom cotton, so I guess it kind of slips under the radar. But if you're interested in growing cotton for educational purposes, I would highly recommend this plant. It's just really cool, really fun to watch. Beautiful flowers. The flowers are about inch and a half. So just a really showy, fun plant to have. Just about all cotton does this cool thing where they make a flower, and either that afternoon or the next day the flower kind of turns pink. So this is a well-documented phenomenon. Cotton growers talk about this phenomenon. This is another close-up, and again, I mentioned this earlier, but this cotton, if you're interested in using this for any kind of like home craft or something, this cotton is really fun because it comes right off the seed, unlike the cotton that's grown in mass agriculture. All right, moving right along to insect visitors. This is the part where it gets a little bit more into the miscellany, and just going to sort of talk about some bugs that have showed up on these mallows. So I have to start with this one because this is my absolute favorite. This is the globe mallow bee. So I was so happy when I learned of the existence of this thing. And this was just this last spring, actually, when I really started, like, I knew I was vaguely aware of its existence, but since I had so many globe mallows in my yard, these things were all over my yard, and I got to watch them behave, and it was so much fun. Down in the bottom right here, you can see two globe mallow bees kind of duking it out over a flower, because it's basically their home. And here in the bottom, again, hopefully you can see my cursor, are two. I'm not making this is not photoshopped. I'm not making this up. You can see it. You can go and see other photographers have documented this too. But here are two globe mallow bees curled up for a nap or whatever they're doing. They're not reproducing. I've seen them do that. They're just napping. They're just napping here. So they are curled up for a nap here, and but it's funny. Sometimes they won't. Sometimes, so these guys over here on the bottom right, this one on the right here is like, hey, can I come nap in this flower? And this guy's like, you certainly cannot. So sometimes they're very defensive, and you can see them do that. You notice the scale up here? They're only a couple of millimeters long, like maybe 5-6 millimeters long. They're like a third of the size of like a European honeybee. Which is interesting because I've seen them fend all, I've seen honeybees come in and be, want to visit the flower, and the globe mallow bees are like, no, you're not. They're just really interesting to watch. So if you have globe mallows in your yard next spring, or even sometimes they'll bloom, you'll see them like in the winter even. Check it out. They're very tiny. I don't know much about their life cycle, but I think they hibernate in the soil. Maybe somebody can correct me there at the end, but I think they have part of their life cycle in the ground. If I'm getting that correct, but yeah. So you can go and read more about globe mallow bees. This is a green lynx spider that showed up on one of my native mallows, Anoda abutyloides, which is a very cool, weird, endemic mallow that I think it's just in Arizona and in Sonora. Very weird, interesting plant, but it's just full of all kinds of insects like this. There's another little, this is a grumpy little crab spider that reminds me of a French bulldog for some reason. Also showed up on the same plant. All right, so this is really cool. I'll try to make this quick. I know we've kind of going on here, but this is a nectary. This is the backside of a cotton leaf, and this is a cotton ant, believe it or not, or a southern red fire ant. So it's a native. It's actually a native fire ant. If you've read anything about the non-native fire ants coming in and causing trouble, this is the native ant, and he is drinking nectar out of that leaf. And I know some of you don't believe me, but hopefully the next few slides will convince you. So here's our native wild cotton, Gossypium thurberi, and I haven't identified this ant species yet. Maybe an Argentine ant. something, again, maybe there's an entomologist in the crowd, and after the talk's over, you can tell me what it is. But hopefully you can see there, he is drinking out of that very large nectary from the backside of this leaf. So next time you see this plant in the wild, flip over the leaf and you will see this nectary. They also have nectaries on their sepals, but I think the ones in the leaves are so much more interesting. And this is a feature that shows up in several genera in Malvaceae. Right here too, right in the back of the leaf on this primary vein. It's a very, very interesting characteristic. Here's another shot of just the nectary by itself. With a hand lens, you can actually see the nectar coming out of that thing. All right, I'm almost done. I'm just going to conclude with a little bit more Malvaceous Miscellany in the form of our native wild cotton, Gossypium thurberi. Again, love this plant. This is from the front, so you can't see the nectary from the front of the leaf. It's just got a really fascinating leaf. These are the flowers when they're kind of a little bit closed. Works great as an ornamental if you're interested in having an ornamental. They will get tall though. Mine, I grew mine from seed. I'll talk about the one in my yard in a second, but I grew mine from seed and it is like 12 feet tall. If you go over to Desert Survivors, ask them if you can see theirs, because they have one that they've had alive for a while, and it's like a small tree. It's got this big woody trunk and everything. Here's some scans that I took of the leaves, just to kind of illustrate the color and also the variation in lobing. Sometimes you have 3 lobes, sometimes you have 5. And that is it. Big thanks to a lot of the people that have, helped with this research for various aspects of it. You'll see a whole diverse group of organizations represented here. Full disclosure, Resolution Copper is one of my funding sources. Sometimes they are not very popular because of what they're trying to do, because of the mine that they're trying to build. I'm happy to talk more about that. Working with the Forest Service, I've been working a lot with the Tonto National Forest Tribal Monitoring Program, and then my employer is Westland Resources. And at that point, I would love to take any questions or discussions or hear about your favorite mallows. It doesn't have to be about my favorite mallows. So again, thanks so much for having me. I'll stick around and I'm happy to chat more.
Thank you very much, Daniel. That was great.
While we're waiting for people to unmute, I will just mention I lived in Mississippi myself and went to Mississippi State.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. Awesome. My brother went to State and I went to Ole Miss, so I guess we're rivals, but
I know a lot of the things that you talked about. Again, I'm not even a casual botanist, but I saw a lot of that stuff along the side of the road, driving between the coast and Starkville, Mississippi, back in the early 70s.
Oh, how cool! That's so cool, Ray. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
What's the mascot for the University of Southern Mississippi?
The golden eagle is the mascot.
Okay.
We don't have a lot of golden eagles in Mississippi, but that's the mascot.
Okay. Well, I certainly like the okra one. That was a hoot.
Yeah.
Okay, on that, I just had a question. Maybe I missed it, but the nectary on that last mallow that you were just showing, is that thurberi?
Yeah, this one is. One is, and the one before it, I think this one is the Saskatoon Aboriginal cotton.
Okay.
But this one's the native, but they're very similar in function, and the same species seem to visit. And I have a whole folder full of leaf nectary images, but I tried to limit myself to just 3.
Well, just a naive question. What's the advantage of leaf nectaries? What is the plant getting from that?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think they're getting defense. These fire ants are ferocious. They're not as ferocious if you've, I bet Ray's stepped in a fire ant nest in Mississippi. but they're not as ferocious as the so-called red imported fire ant, but they're still pretty mean. And the only reason I know that this is the native one is because I chopped off one of them, poor little head, because you have to look at their teeth under the microscope. So the dichotomous key that you identify this genus with, the teeth are very important. So so I had to sacrifice a worker ant to get the ID of this one, because they had built a nest in my backyard. So they were like reproducing and everything. They were sending up their winged alates, that's the name for like their, the males and females they're bigger and they have the wings and stuff, but they're pretty fascinating to watch. That's a great question. Anybody else have a question or comment? Again, it doesn't have to be about my presentation. It can be about your favorite mallows or just some question you had about botany in Arizona.
There were several comments in the chat, Daniel.
Oh, yeah, let me look at that.
Nice photos and stuff like that. All compliments. I'll make 2 quick points myself. Again, I'm not a botanist, but if you travel between Tucson and Phoenix on I-10, there's a rest stop kind of halfway between, and that is called the Sacaton Rest Stop. And the actual town of Sacaton is a couple of miles off of I-10. And then I also spent 3 or 4 years in a little town called Arizona City, just south of Casa Grande. And it's 6 square miles of homes surrounded by cotton fields.
Oh, yeah.
And I did not have a clue what cotton actually did until I really lived there and observed every day driving by just miles of cotton fields, how cotton grows and all the things that you've talked about here. Yeah, to me,
nice.
As a visual observer, were very, very interesting. I appreciate that.
Cool. Well, I'm going to jump off of what you said, and I was so eager to grow my own commercial cotton, like not to sell it, but just to have the plant to see as an example. But like I said, you can't actually order it unless you have a cultivation license for it. So I just stopped on the road one day in Arizona, because you see it all over the roadside.
Right.
Picked up some seeds. They germinated super easily, like 100% germination. And then I had my plant. Technically, that's you're probably not supposed to do that, but I just needed an example to photograph. So I have that germline I've labeled roadside. So I have a second generation from that plant now, actually.
Nice.
Daniel, I had a question about the commercial cotton.
Yeah.
What is that, because it's proprietary?
Yeah, it's probably, I'm guessing most cotton is like Monsanto or, something like that. So you probably need a formal contract with a supplier like Monsanto or somebody to actually obtain the seed. I'm guessing. I haven't looked into that a whole lot, but actually it's interesting because I've grown the Sacaton Aboriginal cotton, and I've grown that one, and the Sacaton Aboriginal is so much easier to grow. It's so much more of a hardy plant. So if you're looking for a cool educational plant to grow, I would recommend that one over the stopping on the roadside and picking up seed method.
That one slide you showed was interesting about the world for the production of cotton in the United States, and it looked like Safford County and Pima County were the highest in the whole country for cotton.
Yeah, that might be true.
That must be Pima County there, right?
Somebody with better Arizona geography can answer that.
And that's
Pima County is actually below that, I think. That's Pinal County, which is the dark green.
okay. Yeah, that's Pinal, and then this would be Graham County here, I believe. And that's Greenlee to the right, but that's Graham County. Well, that's Safford, Thatcher area. There's just tons of cotton there, but that looks like, I mean, that's some of the highest in the country down here in Texas.
Yeah, and when I talk about this, people are like, I don't understand, because this, they look at and see cotton over here, and they're like, this is so wet and humid, and this is so dry. But it's really more about the heat. As long as you're irrigating, cotton doesn't really care about the the air humidity. It just wants those long hot days. And that's true for other things in the mallow family as well. So
yeah.
If you want one more story, I've got the city of Goodyear is just to the west of me here in Avondale. I'm west of Phoenix just a little bit. If anyone knows about the city of Goodyear, and you've heard about the city of Litchfield Park, which is right next to it, Goodyear is there because the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company came out here during the I'm not a history guy, so I can't remember which World War it was, but they came out here to grow cotton to put in aircraft tires.
yeah.
And Litchfield Park, the vice president that came up with the idea and came out here to basically oversee the operation, his last name was Litchfield. So,
Well, an archaeologist, not a botanist, told me something about putting cotton in tires.
if you ever are up in this area and go into the Wigwam Resort up in there, which was built in that area, the actual main office that is used there was actually Litchfield's small office when it was first put there, and they have pictures lining the walls that include production of cotton out here as well.
So this is the book I was talking about earlier. It's probably in this book right here, but this is The Empire of Cotton. I would highly recommend. It just it covers the economics of cotton, the tragedies of cotton. I grew up in a place that is very haunted by the legacy of cotton. So it's a really interesting book. There's also a bunch of great YouTube videos on cotton production, and like 10-minute videos on how ginning works and that kind of thing. If you just can't sleep tonight, you should check out some of those videos.
Daniel, thank you very much. We really appreciated your participating in our
Thanks so much for having me.
affair here. Believe me, it's very interesting.